Alright, moving on to black for the Duskmourn set review. First card, Popular Egotist. 3 mana, 3/2. Human Rogue. Pay 2, sacrifice another creature or enchantment. Gains indestructible, tap it. And then whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So the first card for me that came to mind was Bolas's Citadel. In the past, people played it alongside Mayhem Devil to tap the Bolas's Citadel, deal 10, and then Mayhem Devil triggers 10 times and you get to deal 20. So if you don't want to play red in your Bolas's Citadel deck, this is a nice thing to have there. But also this is just like a decent card. It is definitely not better than Mayhem Devil, but in Standard there is no Mayhem Devil. I don't know if they'll ever print a card in Standard that's close to Mayhem Devil. So this is the type of thing you're probably going to get. But yeah, it can protect itself. It's a sack outlet in and of itself, which is nice. I don't know if there are enough incentives to play a sacrifice deck in Standard, but this is another incentive, so that's cool. Yeah, it seems like a decent card if you can sacrifice stuff, so keep an eye out for this one. And like I said, like if you want to play 4 Mayhem Devils and 4 of these and some weird Collected Company creature sacrifice deck, that's something you could do in Pioneer. But for the most part, I think you're either Bolas's Citadeling with this, or maybe you're playing it in a Standard deck. Now we have Innocuous Rat. 2 mana, 1/1. When it dies, manifest Dread. Really quickly, I want to make a note that there are some rat cards in Standard. This doesn't necessarily go into that style of deck, but cards like this have been borderline in the past. Like, people have played things similar to this in Standard. It's nice that it puts a card in your graveyard. Everyone knows how strong Stitcher Supplier can be, so this being able to be sacrifice fodder and then give you a body that can turn into another creature. Also, it puts a card in the graveyard, so probably not a constructed card, but worth keeping an eye on if you want to try sacrifice stuff. Next, we have Come Back Wrong, 3 mana sorcery to destroy target creature. If a creature card was put into a graveyard this way, return to the battlefield under your control, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So this is a removal spell that feels less bad against things with ETBs and things with dice triggers. So if you play a Beza and make some 1/1s, I can Come Back Wrong to kill your Beza, and then I get the Beza trigger. Maybe I rebuild my board, draw some cards, or whatever. Obviously, if you kill an Atraxa, you get an Atraxa trigger. That's not really the style of game that I personally want to play. But you can see how this card would be appealing. For the most part, I think that this card is not playable. It is a 3 mana sorcerer speed removal spell, and people play some fast aggressive decks. So, cool tool, cool design. I'm not sure if it's worth bothering with. Next is Withering Torment. This card pisses people off. I don't really care. But it is nice to have in constructed formats where maybe you want to play mono black and your opponents just keep beating you with Caretaker's Talent. It's probably not going to see much play. It's very, very bad to spend 3 mana to remove a permanent and lose 2 life, but it is a tool that you have access to if you need it. So you can kill Rest in Peace, I guess. That's another thing that could be relevant. Moving on to Unstoppable Slasher. 3 mana zombie, thank God. We need more zombie support. 3 mana zombie assassin, 2/3 death touch. When it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life total rounded up, which is kind of an insane line of text, and combos with some other things in Standard. And then when it dies, if it had no counters, return it to the battlefield with 2 stun counters on it. So first off, there is already a combo in Standard where you use Bloodletter of Aclazotz and another card that says your opponent loses half of their life, and then they end up losing all of their life. So if you curve this into Bloodletter of Aclazotz, your opponent has to remove it, or they lose the game. I don't think that that's necessarily a great combination, but it might be good enough. Also, I just think this is a decent card. If your opponent has 20 life, it hits for what, 11? They go to 18 and then they take 9. So it's also a 2/3 death touch, which can be pretty annoying to block. And then when it dies, it comes back, and then it keeps doing the same thing. So I don't know about this card. It looks like a good card to me. I wouldn't be surprised if it just didn't matter. Like your opponent just kills it or whatever, and it's too slow. Eventually it gets sunfalled. You know, maybe you just don't care about taking half your life total because you have a bunch of life linkers. But this is a cool design. This is incredibly flavorful for what the set is. It's just like the slow killer that will eventually get you, but doesn't move too quick. So this card rules. I'm very happy it has zombie on it. So if you want to try it in some sort of zombie decks. But yeah, sweet card. Next we have Cynical Loner. 2 mana, 3/1, human. Can't be blocked by glimmers. Probably doesn't matter too much for constructed, but at the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you get to entomb. So search your library for a card and put it in your graveyard. This card is very cool. It's probably less powerful than it reads. But if you're playing like mono black in Pioneer, maybe this is something you want, where every time it lives, you get to dump a Bloodsoaked champion and then reanimate the Bloodsoaked champion. So it kind of just makes 2/1s, assuming it gets to stay alive. Also, you can like Smuggler's Copter, crew with this, attack, loot, bin a Bloodsoaked champion, get it back, and just keep doing that every turn. Or you can just leave the Bloodsoaked champion in your graveyard so you don't get sunfalled or temporary lockdown. Also, it can set up Reanimator stuff. I don't know if that's as realistic, but it's a 2 power, or it's a 2-drop with 3 power with a relevant ability. It's a human. So yeah, I think I might end up trying this in some like mono black aggro decks, which are sort of a relic of the past, but you still get to play with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push and some other cool stuff. So I think one of the advantages the mono black decks had was that they were good against things like control, but now with temporary lockdown and sunfall, it just doesn't matter that your creatures keep coming back because, well, they don't come back, they get exiled. But yeah, sweet card. Next we have Doomsday Excruciator. 6 mana, all black mana, 6/6 flying demon. When it enters, if it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. So you play this, you deck out first, but you have a 6/6. In standard, the only thing I can come up with is you play Jace the Perfected Mind, and then you plus it, so it has a bunch of loyalty. And then the same turn you play your Doomsday Executioner, you minus your Jace, mill your opponent for 6, and they lose the game. So kind of Inverter of Truths-esque. Big 6/6 plus Jace combo thingy you can do in standard. The mana is a little restrictive. I think you could definitely get away with casting a 6 black pip creature and having some blue spells in your deck. I don't think it's the end of the world. Your mana base is going to be a little chalked, but there's a lot of dual lands and you can just play all of them. You don't need that many blue cards in your deck. So will this be good? Probably not, but this card's incredible art, very cool flavor. It's sort of like 2 Doomsdays stapled together. Love the design, and maybe it'll do stuff in standard. Maybe if you're just playing against someone that's doing slow stuff like Domain, you can play this and then play your Jace to get around their Leyline Binding and just deck them out. So, sweet card. Now we have Enduring Tenacity, 4 mana, 4/3, Snake Glimmer. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, and then when it dies, it returns as an enchantment. So if you have like Gifted Aetherborn or the Rogue Nighthawk, Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, you can use this with Grey Merchant of Asphodel. I think this probably just goes in bad decks, as most life gain cards do. But it's okay stats, has a dies trigger sort of. This is mostly probably going to be a fun card, but it's like Veto, which is a card I know people have messed around with in the past. So you can combine it with the Black March from Kamigawa, which lets you pitch a bunch of cards and deal X damage and gain X life. So, you know, maybe keep an eye out for this one. It's probably not too good, but there are a lot of red aggro decks in Pioneer and Standard, so just having like lifelink creatures in your deck isn't the worst idea. So, cool card. Next is Live or Die. So 5 mana, Reanimate at instant speed or destroy a creature. This card probably isn't good enough for Constructed, but the fact that it's instant and the fact that it's a relevant card when your opponent has like Rest in Peace in play or whatever Graveyard Hate piece, I don't know. I think it's worth considering. Instant speed attracts is pretty cool. It's nice against counter spells to have an instant speed threat. Yeah, I don't know. It's expensive, but I would consider it. It's probably not worth playing over something like Cruelty of Gix. But cool card, cool flavor, decent. If there are like creatures that are hating on your graveyard, this is also appealing. I don't know a good example of that, but there's probably creatures that are kind of Rest in Peace adjacent that you can remove with this. Next up, Demonic Council. 2 mana. I love this card. It's just great. It's kind of stupid, but I love it. So it's 2 mana sorcery. Search your library for a demon. Put it in your hand, so it tutors a demon, and then it becomes a demonic tutor when you have Delirium, so you can search for any card. Maybe this goes in my blue-black demon combo deck in Standard. I think tutors in general are pretty overrated in Constructed Magic nowadays. Unless you're doing combo-y stuff, it's just extra mana. You should be curving out. But maybe this is worth doing. I think it's probably worse than just playing Traverse the Ulvenwald or whatever. Most of the time, Analyze the Pawn, I guess, in Standard is something that's more comparable. But the flavor on this card rules, and I'm very happy it exists. I don't know if you should play this card in Constructed, though. Now we have Nowhere to Run. 2 mana flash enchantment. Target creature gets -3/-3. And then it says, creatures your opponent control can be the target of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities of those creatures don't trigger. So, Graveyard Trespasser, Dice to Saint Draft, Glade Cover Scout, all that stuff. I think in practice this card just sucks, but it does have a text box that doesn't really show up in other places on playable cards. It triggers Eerie. It can be blinked by Yorion. It can be sacked to Enigmatic Incarnation. It kills Slickshot Show Off, probably, right? Like they need Monstrous Rage plus Titan Strength or something like that. I mentioned like a blue-black Eerie deck in Standard earlier, so this is something you can like pick up with. I can't remember the name of the fairy, but there's some ways to pick up permanents. So you can sack this to the Viper. I think this card, like black having a Lightning Strike stat line of removal spell is sort of embarrassing when you can just play with things that kill any creature any size. But this has some upsides, so I wish that it said permanents your opponent controls. Like I wish you could randomly fuck up a Lotus Field, but whatever, is what it is. Cool card. Happy it exists. Next is Final Vengeance. 1 black or B for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment, exile target creature. Exile removal is good, obviously. This is very cheap. It's appealing to have. There's sometimes enchantments that you don't want to have in play anymore, like Phyrexian Arena style things. Also, there are enchantments with dodge triggers like Hopeless Nightmare. So yeah, this card seems good. It seems playable. Wouldn't be surprised if it showed up in some places. Next, we have the big bad of the set in Valgavoth Terror Eater. So 9 mana, 6 BB, B, 9/9 flying lifelink. Ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. if a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So there's your rest in peace card, I guess. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So this is gonna beat most people. It's big. It has lifelink. It doesn't counter all your opponent's things, but you get all their things. The main problem I have with this card is that if your opponent just Sunfalls it, then it gets Sunfalled. Like, that's it. If your opponent has a sweeper, you get a sweeper, and then it's dealt with. If I play an Atraxa, and you Sunfall my Atraxa, you're probably still going to lose that game by a lot. So, I guess Edicts as well. If I have like an Edict and you just have this thing, then it just goes away. Also, sometimes you will have 3 permanents. Maybe I'll play a Thraven Inspector, and I'll just sack my things. But it's powerful. It can be put into play with Transmogrify, Indomitable Creativity. Slickshot Show-Off decks are probably not beating the 9/9. I think this card is worse than Atraxa, which is hilarious because it costs 9 mana. But maybe there are reasons to care about this instead. I don't know. If Atraxa didn't exist, I think this card would be much more exciting. There's probably reasons to play this over Atraxa, but for the most part, I think that it's worse. So, yep. Cool card, though. Very scary. Incredible art. This set rules. Next up, Leyline of the Void. Reprint that is just a one-sided rest in peace. There's some good graveyard cards in the set, so it makes sense. If you don't really have to worry about Reanimator decks being too good in Standard, because Rest in Peace and Leyline in the Void are both in Standard, which are 2 of the best graveyard hate cards ever printed, and then they also printed a new artifact that's one of the best graveyard hates ever printed. So, yeah, good card. Commune with Evil, 3 mana sorcery. Look at top 4, put 1 in your hand, rest go to the graveyard, you gain 3 life. If you're trying to set up Reanimates, this is kind of nice. It can help you find the Reanimate and then bin the cards you don't want. It's expensive. I don't think that this is a constructed playable card, but it's close. Gain 3 is a nice line of text. Maybe it can help you find your Insidious Roots. Maybe if you care about the gain life trigger, I guess there's the Snake, right? Where this could end up being Lightning Helix. So, cool card. Decent enabler. Now we have Meathook Massacre 2. Definitely the sequel is worse. So, I do want to talk about this card. It's very cool. I think it's interesting. I think it's maybe more exciting than Meathook Massacre and less miserable, but still similar flavor. So it's XX and 4 black. Legendary enchantment. When it enters, each player sacrifices X. So for 6 mana it'll be 1. For 8 mana it'll be 2 creatures sacrificed. Whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 3 life to reanimate it with a finality counter. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they have to pay 3 life. If they don't, you get it with a finality counter. So if you have a 2/2 and I have a 2/2 and I play this for 6 mana, then you're going to take 3 if you don't want me to get your creature, and I'm probably going to just pay 3 and get my thing back. So where does this end up being actually good? I think the answer is nowhere. I think for the most part, this is a 4-mana card where it may be in a sacrifice deck or whatever. You just cast it and hope that that's good enough. But I've said it a billion times. I'll say it again. Temporary Lockdown, Sunfall. Those cards just invalidate so many strategies and disincentivize you from trying so many things. One of the cool things you could do, which is a bit of a pipe dream, but again, more casual constructed side of things, is you can play like this and then play a Grey Merchant. Drain your opponent for 6. Now, if your opponent can't exile the Grey Merchant, whenever it dies, it's going to come back. It's going to drain for 6 again. So, yeah, it's a cool card. I think that it sucks, but happy it exists, and a good casual card for sure. All right, moving on to not casual card. We have Overlord of the Bal Merc, 5 mana, 5/5 enchantment creature, impending 5 for 2 mana. So this is the cheapest one. So 2 mana to trigger up the Beanstalk. Whenever it enters or attacks, mill 4. And then you can return a non-avatar creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. So, yeah, this is just really cheap. This is really cheap. It's not an incredibly powerful 5 mana card, but the fact you can play it for 2, it's a graveyard enabler. It does a lot of cool stuff. Also, there is a card in Standard, I believe it's called Render Inert. It's like 3 mana. Remove up to 4 or 5 counters from a permanent. So you can play this on 2, get back a creature you milled, and then remove all the counters from it, and then it's just a 5/5 on turn 3. And it can attack because it was already in play. So there's some cool stuff you can do with this card. Also, you can sacrifice the Enigmatic, tutor up a 6-drop. It's very good at enabling Delirium. One thing you have to be careful with this is that it doesn't get avatars. So let's say you want to play like 12 Overlords in your deck, you need to make sure you have other creatures that aren't Overlords. But like I said, this card being so cheap and having a relevant text box, as well as scaling up into the late game, it seems good, like all the Overlords. Next is Vavo Faithful. 1 mana, 1/1. You can pay 4 to sacrifice it to reanimate, activate only as a sorcery. I don't know if this is a constructed playable card, but it's close. It's a 1-drop. It's a cleric. There's some cleric cards in Standard. Also, you can use, what's the name of that card? Training Grounds. So with Training Grounds, you can use this for 2 mana, which is kind of cute. Probably not necessarily worth doing, but it's just a 1-drop with a relevant text box. It's always worth putting and considering when you're doing deck building, and especially in this huge Standard where there's so many different options. Things like Training Grounds, you want to take note of stuff like this and remember where it can end up going. And that is it for the non-rooms. For black rooms, you have Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card. If you control a demon, drain your opponent for 2. Otherwise, you lose 2. And then for 5 mana, you get a 6/6 flying demon. So I don't know how many demons are constructed playable in Standard, but there's already Archfiend that draws. Makes a demon itself. It's very easy to sacrifice enchantments, so you can play this to draw cards and just get rid of it if you don't want it. And then when you get the demon into play, like, it kills people really fast. It's effectively 8 power because now your enchantment's draining your opponent. This card is interesting. It's another thing that you could play in all these like enchantment, eerie, enigmatic incarnation piles. Yeah, just keep an eye out for it. It's just a Phyrexian Arena with some extra stuff. But maybe you're playing against an aggro deck and you don't want to play your Phyrexian Arena, and then this ended up just being a 5 mana 6/6 flying. You can block your opponent's later slick shot show offs and whatnot. So seems like a decent card. Also, the 6/6 dodges Lightning Axe. I don't think you want a 5 mana 6/6 in Pioneer, but it's something. Now we have Defiled Crypt and Cadaver Lab. Mostly looking at this for the Cadaver Lab side. It's 1 black for an enchantment. When you unlock this door, return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. And then for 4 mana, whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2, triggers once per turn. So kind of an Insidious Roots style card. But as with all the other rooms, if you just have a 1 mana spell that triggers Eerie and Constellation and all that stuff, it's worth keeping an eye on. Calyx is another card that's in Standard where you can kind of copy these things. I'm not 100% sure how Calyx actually works with rooms, so I apologize if that doesn't work the way I want it to, but obviously you can just play this, pick it back up, play it again, trigger Eerie, get a bunch of value that way. And the final black room is Funeral Room. So 3 mana, whenever a creature you control dies, drain your opponent for 1. And then for 8 mana, whenever you unlock it, return all creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. So there's the white 5-drop that I mentioned in the white video, where you can just play that for 5 mana and then unlock this 8 mana spell later, which is kind of exciting. I don't know if this card is worth doing, but the Funeral Room is kind of close to worth considering. I'm just going to bring it up again. I apologize, but like these style of sacrifice decks are pretty bad versus like Temporary Lockdown and Sunfall and all that stuff. But maybe not Sunfall. Like Temporary Lockdown is kind of annoying. But I guess you can just sack your board. There's probably plenty of ways to remove the Temporary Lockdown. So maybe there's like a cool sacrifice deck where you sacrifice your board and eventually you can get to 8 mana and get all your board back, or you have some way to cheat and unlock the room with the 5-drop. This card's sweet. I don't know if it's good enough, but it's interesting. And that is it for black. I think I'm going to do multicolored and colorless and everything as one video, because there aren't too many of those cards. But if you guys enjoy these, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. And almost done, home stretch. One more to go. I'll see you guys in the next video.